Yes. Keep the decorum. Let's go. So what were we talking about? Marriages. Yesterday we discussed the various aspects about marriages. And from a biblical perspective, what's the source of marriage in the Torah? Well, we said that the original source of marriage, you could find at the very beginning, the genesis of creation, was when God created Adam and Eve. And we talked about that. So that's the very first source where it's Ish and Isha. Interestingly, in the Hayom Yom, today we read about the four terminologies that are used for a human being. What are the four terminologies in the Torah for humanity? Anyone know? So it starts off, it tells us that, God says at the beginning of creation, let us create man, na'aseh Adam. What's another way of translating the word Adam in Yiddish? A mensch. Why does God say na'aseh in the plural? Isn't God the one creating man? Now, there's different interpretations and explanations, but one of them is that God is saying it's a joint effort. You and I are going to create a mensch. God gives us the tools, but we are the ones who, together with Almighty God, will become the mensch that we need to be, the decent, good human being. It's maybe a responsibility of parents to their children, of grandparents, my friends, to your grandchildren. And of course, it is also ourselves. We need to work on ourselves. And it's a constant work and effort in developing our character traits. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and what's unique to the masculine, to males, and what's unique to the feminine, to women, to girls. And there is an advantage. Girls have a bat mitzvah at age 12 because, after all, there's a greater maturity. So let's talk about, we'll get to that in a moment, the difference between Notzar and Nake. We're going to get a little bit Kabbalistic today, okay? I want to push you a little bit to get quite intellectually engaged. So today I won't be telling you a lot of jokes like I did yesterday. Yesterday was just the icebreaker for this week. Today we're going to get very deep, please God. So that's the first name for man we see in the Torah is, what's the first name? Now I got to go back to the Hayom Yom to see which one's which. I think it's so the first terminology was Ish. Ish, yeah, Ish. Or for women, it's Isha. Okay, God says I'm making man and woman, Ish and Isha. And of course, the man has the letter Yud of God's name, and the woman has the Hey of Hashem's name. Together, if a marriage is tied and connected with the divine source, and think about it, a married couple have the most divine capability of creating life, like God. So if it is a marriage, it's based on divine, on God, the man giving the Yud, the Ish, the woman, the Isha giving the Hey. Where's the other half of God's name? You know that the marriage contract, which we'll talk more about momentarily, is called the Ketubah. But really in Hebrew, it could just be called a Kitab. Why the extra two letters, Vav and Hey, to make it Ketubah? Maybe that's the other two letters of God's name, which gives you the full wholesomeness of Hashem's name, Yud Kei and Vav Kei. So that's one aspect of that's the first part, Ish. Ish, our sages tell us, that's the intellectual capacity of man. What's the next terminology? That's Adam. Adam, our sages explain, is the emotional aspect of a human being. And if you think about it, the word Adam is related to the word Adameh or Adama. What is Adama? From the earth. But Adameh also means created to, similar. Adama le'elyon, in the image of God. So it's our choice which way we're going to go. Remember last week or whenever it was, we talked about the Kruvim, the cherubs in Bereshit. When they're expelled from Gan Eden, then they're demonic, angels of destruction. Whereas in the book of Shemot, when they are by the Ark of the Covenant, then what are they? Angelic faces. Every one of us has the choice, has the ability, has the potential to be this or that. It's our choice. And in the very name Adam, which is referring to the emotional capacity of man, our feelings, there you have the name Adam. Adam reflects either we could be Adama, from the dust of the earth that we come from, or we could be Adam El Elyon. We could behave in the divine character of ourselves. And that's very much related to our emotional instincts. You think about it. Emotionally, we could be like an animal craving the soil, or narcissistic behaviors, or we could be S-O-U-L instead of S-O-I-L. Okay, these are all the ideas that we discussed previously, just looking at the four terminologies of man. The third terminology for man is Enosh. What's Enosh? Enosh, you'll find many verses in the Torah when man is referred to as Enosh. Enosh is where it's the frailties of humanity. It's our failings, our shortcomings. Remember this rule that we've taught many, many times. We have to remind ourselves. Failure is not getting knocked down. Failure is only if we stay down. But it's those times that we do fail. Remember, you don't have to remain a failure, but the times that we do fail, that's the term Enosh. It's our shortcomings, both intellectually and emotionally. That's Enosh, no. But the name Enosh, we find multiple sources of it in Torah, and every time the word Enosh is referring to our failures. And the final terminology for a human being is Gever. What does Gever mean? Gever comes from the term Gibor. What does Gibor mean? Or Gibora, strong. So the fourth term, and that's the greatest and most ideal, because Gever is the strength, is when we overcome our intellectual and emotional shortcomings. When we are strong in both intellectually and emotionally, that we have that strength. Ata Gibor, we refer to Hashem as Gibor, as mighty, Almighty God. And guess what? Every one of us can have that almighty element when we overcome our challenges and our shortcomings. That's the terminology Gever. And I have an incident I recall when I came to Israel. You got to speak Hebrew properly. So we once came to Israel, and I went a few times, twice as a little kid. My mother's family, her siblings, most of them lived in Israel. And unfortunately, we lost an uncle, my mother's brother. Sadly, my mother and two of her brothers, all three passed away from, one from Hodgkin's, another from leukemia, my mother from aplastic anemia, all under age 60. So it was quite scary. And I went for my uncle passed away in 2000, and his son got married. It was the week of his son's wedding. So the wedding was postponed, and then we were there for Shiva and then for the wedding. It was a very sad time in my family. And my mother couldn't go. She wasn't strong enough herself to go. So I went as my brother and I went as family representatives. Interestingly, my brother was studying in South Africa then. He was here for the year 99, 2000. And he came from Joburg, and I met him in the airport. We had to take a shirut to Jerusalem. Now, you know what a shirut is? The Hebrew word for taxi, right? So we needed a taxi to Jerusalem. Anyways, I watched an American couple we were going to go with. So the American couple asked somebody, slicha. Now, how would you say slicha means pardon? Right? You hardly hear that in Israel, but right. So this American couple who we were with, I figured they speak a better Hebrew than us. And we said we'll share the shirut from Tel Aviv airport to Jerusalem. By the way, now there's a train that takes you. It's like the Chal train. You've taken it, right? How long did it take you? 17 minutes, that's it. Oh, 17 shekels, 20 minutes. Could you imagine that? It used to be an hour and a half on a shirut, and the shirut takes you all around Jerusalem. Somehow my luck was always to be the last stop of the shirut, So you have a headache, you get off the plane jet lagged, then you arrive in Israel, and now the shirut is taking you here, there, and everywhere, because they're not going to take the shirut until it's packed, probably like the taxis here, and Israel's no different. And finally, when it's packed, then everybody paid their 40, 50 shekel to go in the shirut. Oh, now we're ready to go. Anyways, how would you say shirut in plural? Any Israelis here? How would you say shirut in plural? Shirutim? Well, what else does shirutim mean besides for? So this couple come over to somebody Israeli. Slicha, eifa yesh shirutim, meaning where are the taxis, but really it means where are the bathrooms. So the guy says, sham nashim sham gvarim. Here's the man, there's the woman. Remember the word gever. Lo, anachnu rotzim lalechet biyachad. We want to go together. Now, Today, that might be a little bit more acceptable. You have non-gender bathrooms, everybody together. But remember, 23 years ago in 2000, that wasn't very common. And this guy looked at them, what? You want to go to the bathroom together? Lo, anachnu rotzim shirutim liYerushalayim biyachad. We want to, anyways, it was some little story. So you have to know when you're speaking Hebrew to use the right words, right? The word shirut means taxi, but shirutim is the bathroom. So remember to use the words correctly. and not to make a fool of yourself. But the reason I mention this is because even in modern day Hebrew, gever means a man. Now, you might say, why are so many different adjectives? Sometimes if I'm writing an article, I'm sending an email, I'm writing whatever it might be, I like to spice up my article with different words. Why? So it doesn't get monotonous that I'm using the same word over and over, right? Even this morning, I was writing a thank you letter to somebody. I said, thank you for your generous contribution, your magnanimous donation of 180 Rand makes a tremendous impact. You have to spice up the wording to different, otherwise it's what you're saying, donation over, generosity. So you have to use different words. But if you've studied the verbal advantage, you know that you have to use the precise word and not its second cousin. So 4 words in Hebrew that mean human beings. Now you just learned today from the Hayom Yom that it's 4 different levels of a person. Now you know that Ish or Isha is referring to man or woman in their intellectual capacity. The word Adam, which by the way, there's no plural for Adam, a very interesting story that happened in 1912. 1912 was a fascinating year while the Titanic set sail and also sank that year. I think that was the year of the Mendel Beilis trial. That was the year that a young Jew in Ukraine by the name of Mendel Beilis was accused allegedly of murdering a Christian kid. It was the most famous blood libel of the 20th century, of murdering a Christian child for his blood to bake matzahs. Now, it's the most ludicrous claim because according to Jewish law, if you read last week's Parsha, blood is forbidden for Jews to consume. We're not allowed to consume blood, let alone in our matzah. But that was a blood libel. Not to go into all the details of the story, at the time, when Mendel Beilis was actually held on trial, they didn't just hold Mendel Beilis in trial. The prosecution brought with books of Talmud to try to prove how Jews are supremacists and discriminatory against everyone else. And they brought a line from the Talmud that says, Atem Kruyim Adam. You are called man, that the Jewish people are called man. Said the prosecution, you see, you Jews are racists. You think only you are called man. And what are the rest of us? We're subhuman? Well, Mendel Beilis had a great lawyer. And this lawyer consulted with some of the great rabbis at the time, including the Rebbe Rashab, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, as well as Rabbi Yaakov Mazeh, who was the chief rabbi of Moscow. He happened to also be the grandfather of comedian Jackie Mason. Jackie Mason's named after him. Yaakov was Jackie. Mazeh was changed to Mason to sound more Americanized, but he was his paternal grandfather. And Jackie Mason was named after him. And Jackie's grandfather spoke there in the court, and he said, you see, right here, what ostensibly this one Jew, Mendel Beilis, allegedly murdered that Christian child. Yet, if an Italian person were to commit a crime, would you be holding all Italians on the witness stand, right? Would you be holding if a French person, if a Chinaman, if any other nationality or human being were to commit an offense, would you be bringing sources from their historical books to say, you see, it's in their DNA? But with us Jews, you do that. And therefore, Rabbi Mazeh explained that there's no plural word for Adam. You don't say Adamim. Think about many words in Hebrew. I have a table in front of me. One table is a shulchan, shulchanot. You're sitting on a chair. One is a kisei, multiples kisot. Any word in Hebrew has a singular and a plural version. But the word Adam, there's no plural for Adam. We don't say Adamot, we don't say Adamim, Adam. Said Rabbi Mazeh, you see, as a Jewish people, when one person is accused of an alleged crime, all of us are being stood on trial here, are being held trial. We are one people like that, which doesn't seem to exist with others. It is us who you hold on trial like that. Ultimately, that's the idea you want to achieve in a marriage, is that this concept that the Jewish people are called Adam, that we become one. Just like the first creation in the Torah, we should all be one. And that's exemplified and demonstrated, hopefully, in a marriage where the couple can really truly become one. That so many years later, where's Ellie? He was here yesterday. He was married 64 years. Ellie's married. Anyone here beat that yet? I've seen people who are married more than 64 years here at the Shir, but at least this week, Ellie's taken the record of 64 years, unless any of you tell me you've exceeded that. 64 years, same marriage, Cana and Hara. So we realize, we understand that marriage is a natural phenomenon, as we talked about this yesterday, because Adam himself, at the very beginning of creation, remember all of yesterday's jokes, Adam was looking for company, and he asked God for a partner, and that partner is Eve. So from the very beginning of creation, humans, since history's beginning, thousands of years before God gave us the Torah, were seeking that company, that connection, that bond, the love, the romance of a partner in life. But now at Mount Sinai, God further validated the institution of marriage, and God explicitly forbade sexual relations between a man and a woman unless they marry, which is one of the brachas, the blessings that we recite under the chuppah. The osar lanu eshar sures lanu ayidei chuppah v'kiddushin baruch atah Hashem mekadesh amo Yisrael ayidei chuppah v'kiddushin, that it's through marriage that a couple are allowed to live intimately together. Now, obviously, marriage evolved over the years, and from common practice, it became this vital necessity. Although, as we demonstrated yesterday, it's becoming less and less popular and common today. But God did not just say back then, if you want to engage sexually, get married. Okay, you want to have some fun, just get married first. No, God introduced a formal marriage process, what we know today as the chuppah ceremony, when the couple are commencing their marriage. And you have to follow the exact rules to initiate a legitimate marriage. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The Torah does not explicitly mention the wedding ceremony that we recognize today. Chuppah, the ring, the yichud room, the reception, the catering, the flowers. The biblical source for the chuppah ceremony that we know today is the biblical term taking a wife, which we see in this week's parsha. If a man takes a wife and is intimate with her, this is what the Torah says. And this is where we see marriage first in the Torah, in this very verse that is in this week's parsha. That, today we know the formal act as the moment the groom places the ring on the bride's finger. And that's when I always tell them, you may now update your Facebook status. Maybe I'm outdated. Maybe today's Instagram, TikTok, and I don't know what. Pardon? Ki-teitze. Ki-seitze. In our Ashkenazic Hebrew, it's ki-seitze. In Sephardic Hebrew or Israeli Hebrew, ki-teitze. Either way. It's interesting that the parsha of marriage talks about a battle. We won't go there now. The couple told me that this lady said to me she experienced the 3 rings. I asked her which 3 rings. She said the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and the suffering. Now you know why every battle is always called an engagement. Begins with an engagement. All right. The term taking, as you could see here in this verse in this week's parsha, taking a wife, it actually appears a few times in the Torah, which include this week's parsha. And here it's in the context of a man, not exactly a romantic context. It's a man defaming his wife, questioning her virginity, her fidelity. Okay, so let's just read the verse and then we'll analyze it. So this week's parsha, ki yikach ish isha v'ala usnea, if a man takes a wife and is intimate with her, and now what happens? They lost their romance. He despises her. Ay, ay, ay. What just happened? We just lost the romance. No. It's back. Good. And is intimate with her. Let's read the verse in the Torah. Some law alilas davar. And he makes libelous charges against her, accusations against his wife. V'haitzi ala shemra. Remember, this is libelous, right? He gives her a bad name. What does he say about her? He says, I took this woman. By the way, it's today's Chumash reading, Tuesday, Shlishi. Read it this morning in the Chitas. Rashi tells us something very interesting. Rashi says from this verse we learned, we're not going to discuss this point from Rashi. I'm just making mention of it. It says you cannot come to a judge with an accusation against another person without that person being present. Last week, somebody had a case, a claim against somebody else, and I was involved with this. And he asked me for the number to a rabbi, a dayan in the basement. I said, okay, gesundheit, call the dayan. Now, the reason he wanted to call the dayan is because he felt that he was under the impression that the other party knew this rabbi, the dayan, Rabbi Fox, and he figured I could call Dayan Fox and discuss it with him. But Dayan Fox had to recuse himself immediately because, first of all, the judge is not allowed to hear one side of the story without the other side, right? And where do we know this from? Right here, Rashi tells us, look at this word. He says, I have taken this woman. I took this woman. He's standing before the judge and said, I took this woman. Meaning she needs to be present with him. He cannot allege an accusation against her without her being present. So maybe he's told his parents, maybe he told his lawyer, maybe he told someone else. But to the judge, they both have to be present. In fact, our Beis Din, I know, will not handle a mediation case or litigation case or an arbitration case without both parties being present. So if you're coming to the Beis Din and you have a story, you don't sit with the dayan, you sit with one of the secretaries. It could be a woman, it could be a man. In fact, I discovered last week that the receptionist at the Beis Din is a lawyer. She's a lawyer. Her name is Kenny, forgetting her name, but she's actually a very highly qualified lawyer. So she understands law, she understands legal matters. And when you come to the Beis Din, you have a case that you want to bring them, you want them to litigate, officiate, meditate, mediate, whatever, not meditate, but mediate or arbitrate. By the way, there are differences between arbitration, mediation, and litigation. So the point is, you don't talk to the dayan because the dayan is going to be judging. You can't hear one side without the other. Then you talk to this lady who's a lawyer. She's not taking any sides. She's hearing your side of the story. She's going to hear the other side of the story. Then the two of you will stand before the three dayanim, which we discussed in last week's parsha, shoftim. Remember, the verse doesn't say shofet, one judge. It's a minimum of 3 judges in a Jewish court of law. 3 judges, because the Torah says, acharei rabim lahatos, there has to be majority rule. You need 3 judges to decide. So if it's 2 against 1, then we know how the verdict will be determined. In major cases, it's 23 judges. And in the most severe cases, how many judges? 71. I'm testing all of you to see if you're listening. That's like the biggest cases ever. Sanhedrin was 71 judges, exactly. 71 elders, they were called. So let's continue with this verse. And a man has a libelous, or shouldn't say libelous, right now he has this claim. Again, he's ruining her reputation if it's not true. He says, V'aykarev aleha, when I came to her, right? I married this woman. And now we were meant to be intimate. And what did I discover? Or not discover, was her virginity. I did not find evidence of virginity for her. Okay, the translation I took from Safari, I had it like this. So please, it's not exactly the way I translate it, but I copy and paste from Safari to make sure, otherwise I'll sit here typing every verse out. You would have to wait 4 hours for me to come give the shir. And I don't have all day to prepare just slides for our classes. So I do copy and paste them from whatever source I get, but it's not necessarily the way I would translate. I mean, just the flow. Anyways, let's read the verse. So parsha, we're not talking commentary right now. The MS haya hadavar hazeh. If this matter was true, that she wasn't virgin, then, right, no evidence of the girl's virginity is found. And what does the verse say? Take the girl to the entrance of her father's house, and the men of the city shall pelt her with stones, and she shall die. And she did a disgraceful act in Israel. Okay, by the way, the commentaries tell us this wasn't a very common thing. Besides the point, because for any time a person has a claim, an accusation against somebody else, you always need how many witnesses? Last week's parsha, 2 witnesses. And the witnesses are always cross-examined and are investigated and interrogated in order to determine that they are telling the truth. This is not the kind of matter that is exactly something that you bring two witnesses in to know if a person, how do you know if a woman wasn't virgin? Well, it's a very complex matter, but basically, if they were already engaged for marriage. By the way, engaged for marriage today is very different than engaged for marriage back then. Today, an engagement is less formal than it was then. Today, an engagement is a commitment to marriage, but if engagement is broken off, it's terminated, then each one goes their own way. It's not a celebration. You don't throw a bracha. We don't have a big kiddush to celebrate that a couple's engaged. Although I have to say, I do see some people have divorce parties these days. Thank God. I saw somebody post on Facebook the other day that he's throwing a big party that he's finally divorced from his wife. Okay. Yeah, this a man I know, he was invited, his wife invited him, his ex-wife invited him to her divorce party from him. Yeah, things that people do these days. Whatever the case is, it's not necessarily, sometimes it is something to celebrate. If it was a toxic marriage and finally, matir asurim, finally they're released from each other, maybe it's something to celebrate, but it's not the norm. But in biblical times, actually all the way until the times of, even in the times of the Talmud, I can't give you an exact date when our great illustrious Jewish sages decided to change the process. But let me tell you, I studied the Gemara in the morning. I'm currently studying Tractate Ketubot. And the Daf Yomi cycles right now in Tractate Kiddushin. They're both about marriages. And in the times of the Talmud, it was an engagement actually required an actual divorce, a get. So they would get engaged, and a year later, they would get married. Today, we do both processes. The first part is called Erusin, and the second part is called Nisuin. They both take place under the chuppah. And we usually read the ketubah right, but today the engagement is not a formality like it was in Talmudic or biblical times. Breaking the plate, yeah, we do that today as a symbol to say that just as this plate that is broken, it's an interesting that we do. We break a plate to say that just as this plate is radically changed from its former state, and it can no longer be put together properly. We're saying we hope that this marriage, this relationship, or this engagement is one that will be irreversible, that they will not. But the truth is, the Torah gives us, and we'll talk about that tomorrow, hopefully, the laws of divorce, that it is reversible. I mean, you're not stuck in a marriage. You're not stuck in a relationship. In fact, I'm paraphrasing. I'm not using the exact words of the Talmud here, but I believe the Talmud says something to the effect of that why would people want to get married if they knew they're stuck with this person for the rest? You might be romantically connected. You might be in love with each other, but you never know what will change. We don't endorse, and we don't promote divorce. But I'm sure around this room, we all know that realistically, not all marriages are destined to stay forever. Sometimes you met your bashert, sometimes you didn't meet the bashert. I'm not going to talk about that today, how that all works. But we know that divorce is a reality. And thank God it's a reality, because which marriage is it? Protestants or some Christian sect? It's you're married for life, to death do us part. That's a very nice sentiment. But if it's a toxic relationship, they shouldn't be stuck together forever. More about that tomorrow. So we learn this idea that man is biblically required to perform a specific taking to initiate the marriage, as you can see in this verse. And as we discussed today, it's common practice for the groom, for the chassan, to fulfill this biblical obligation. How? What's the symbolism of taking a wife? You give her a ring. The ring, there's three things that are needed. The ring is only one of three halachic options in order to formalize a marriage. In fact, today we do all three. What are the three options? One is called kesef. That's symbolized by giving the ring. What does kesef literally mean? Silver or money, right? So you give something of monetary value to your wife in the traditional Jewish way. That is symbolized by the ring. What's the second thing? Shtar. Shtar means a contract. What is the contract of the marriage? The ketubah. Very good. And the shtar, ultimately, I know a lot of people put the ketubahs and they make it a very fancy, beautiful pictures and their frame and everything, lithographs. But honestly speaking, it's not the most romantic document, the ketubah. Did you ever read a ketubah? A ketubah is an anti-nuptial contract. In the ketubah, the husband is committing to his wife that he is going to look after her. Long before prenups and antenups and all that, a ketubah is where husband commits to care for his wife, to love her, and to take care of her financially, basically, to take care of her physical needs. And her reciprocation of caring and loving him. But it's more about the husband's obligations to his wife. And then it says very clearly, if this relationship terminates, if this marriage doesn't last, then he has to pay her, not she has to pay him. He has to pay her money. The amount is determined based on her status before marriage, if she was virgin or not, basically. Okay? And what's the third entity? What's the third way of consummating a Jewish marriage? Today we do all three. Kesef shtar, bia. What does bia mean? Bia literally means coming together, engaging with her sexually with the express intent of forming a lasting union. Not this is not modern day hanky panky. Okay, this is, and today where do we see all three? Well, if you have been to a Jewish wedding lately, or you could join me next week, I'll be officiating one marriage next week and the one the week after. And you could see under the chuppah what happens. First of all, the chuppah itself, the chuppah canopy symbolizes a home that is one that is hospitable, that is open on all sides, like Abraham and Sarah, the founders of the Jewish nation, who were known for their generosity, their hospitality, their kindness, their care. So that's welcoming in the home. But where do we see all three? Kesef, the groom puts a ring on his bride. And by the way, we don't have exchanging of rings in Jewish custom. The groom only receives his ring, and in Hasidic custom, we don't even have rings. You can see I have no ring on my finger. Although my mother was a proponent, she endorsed it. She said she thinks men should wear rings. So if a man's taken and you won't hit it, you won't in any way be flirting with a married man. My mother felt very strongly about that. But anyways, I don't know. She told me that she likes it. But it's not traditional in the Hasidic community to wear rings, so I don't wear a ring, even though my mother liked it. Well, my wife never gave me a ring. Let's just say that. If she gave me a ring, it will be a different story. But I gave her a ring. Yes. She wrapped me in a talus, not in a ring. So the ring you see under the chuppah, the man says, Harayat Mekudeshet Li, and he says, you are hereby consecrated to me with this ring according to the law of Moses and Israel. That's the ring. Then we read the ketubah. That's the shtar, the second part. And then what happens after a chuppah? Where did the chassan and kala go? They walk into a secluded room called the yichud room. We have to make sure that room has no escape door. Only the one door they go in and go out. Now, the purpose of that is they're supposed to go in there for a minimum of 8 minutes. And there are witnesses standing outside. We have witnesses, by the way, only for these three parts. For the kesef, there are 2 witnesses called up who need to witness, who need to see that he puts the ring on her. And they have to testify that that ring is worth money, that it's a real ring, that it's not that Chinese, inferior Chinese stuff. It has to be real. And it should ideally be of gold, not of silver, gold, platinum. It should be something very valuable. And no inscriptions on it. We have a whole halacha about the ring. For the shtar, the ketubah has 2 witnesses on it, right? And the third part, we don't let the witnesses go into the room with them. But the witnesses stand outside the room to know that they were in that room for a minimum of 8 minutes, which means they had at least the minimum required time according to Jewish law to consummate the act of intimate together. Whether or not they are, most people I don't think are on their wedding day, but the idea is they had sufficient amount of time to be together at the very beginning of their marriage. And that's the way a Jewish wedding is consummated. Let me just put it here as Maimonides puts it. We'll read this very quickly, briefly. Rambam, Maimonides says, before the Torah was given, when a man would meet a woman in the marketplace and he and she decided to marry, he would bring her home, conduct relations in private, and make her his wife. That's the way it was. It was hakuna matata, whatever you want to do. Now, once the Torah was given, The Jews were commanded that when a man desires to marry a woman, he must acquire her as a wife in the presence of witnesses. Only after this does she become his wife. This is alluded to in the verse, and we have the verse in the Torah. It says, when a man takes a wife and has relations with her, and that's in this week's Parsha. This process of acquisition fulfills one of the Torah's positive commandments. The process of acquiring a wife is formalized in three ways: through the transfer of money, through the transfer of a formal document, and through sexual relations. There you have it in halacha, how Jewish marriages are formalized, are consummated. The ketubah is a legal document, a legally binding document. In fact, a couple cannot live together if they don't know where the ketubah is. And in fact, it's not supposed to be in the man's possession, it has to be in the woman's possession. Some women will keep it in a safe deposit box. Others will keep it somewhere where they know. If God forbid there's a fire and the ketubah gets burned, they have to draw up a new ketubah right away. That doesn't mean you have to have the ketubah on your wall, but it does mean, and that's why people keep it on the wall maybe, but it does mean that you always know at all times where your ketubah is, because without it, the marriage is invalidated, and you have to have a new ketubah drawn up immediately. All right. Yeah. Oh, for sure. The ketubah is used in our community and most Jewish communities around the world as a proof of Jewishness. Okay, so the ketubah is a very important document to keep safely, to know where it is at all times. One at a time, please. Yes. It doesn't matter, because if the person, if the husband died, then the ketubah is irrelevant at that point. Yeah, it's taken as they've married, but if a husband dies, then the woman is allowed to marry any other man. Whereas if they got divorced, then the ketubah is needed in order to cash in on the get, to get the finance. Well, until there's a get, the woman is called an aguna. Aguna means a chained woman. She's not allowed to be with any other man. Again, it's in this week's parsha. And a woman who does not have a get is not allowed to be intimate with another man. A man is also not allowed to be. But the difference is, they're both considered infidelity. The difference, though, is if a woman has sexual relations with another man, first of all, that's adultery. And any child born from that would be considered a mamzer. Okay, so it's a very, very complex matter. So it's forbidden for both, but men can't have children, women can. Also, halachically speaking, a man is allowed to be married to more than one woman at once. Biblically speaking, the sages forbade it. Only the Ashkenazic sages, by the way, forbade it. Sephardic sages never have. I don't know of any polygamous Jewish marriages today, but back in the day, King Solomon had 1,000 wives. He did have a lot of wives, and he had a reason, and it's the last week's parsha that forbids it. His reason was it was creating alliances. It wasn't all about, but he transgressed an explicit law of the Torah, and the sages condemn him for it. Okay. All right. So according to the Torah, the groom actually only has to do a simple act to formalize his marriage. What is it? Give his bride the ring, or any of the other two options, or just give her a document, a ketubah. But we all know, if you go to the chuppah, obviously you see that it's a lot more elaborate than just transferring a ring to the bride. There's a whole ceremony, right? The bride and groom are enveloped by the chuppah canopy, and following the chuppah, they go into the yichud room. The chuppah serves a purpose beyond adding a nice romantic touch to the sunset background. It's so nice. I officiated 2 weddings I could recall on the beach. It's so nice in the sunset there. Right? We don't squeeze the yichud room into the schedule just to give the newlyweds a couple of minutes away from the cameras. Okay, every detail of the ceremony is crucial to the halachic marriage process. Why all this extra complication? What's it all about? And the truth is, the chuppah and the yichud room, everything that happens in a Jewish marriage represents an important element. And that's why I said the chuppah is symbolizing a home. And the yichud room is this idea that potentially The husband and wife can be intimate together in that room. The sages, Jewish sages, have decreed that it is not enough for a man to just perform the simple act of giving a ring and putting it on his wife's finger, or to be intimate with his wife. We have the rules that were, the sages made all three necessary. A couple have to act on their commitment to each other. Only once the groom proves that he's actually serious and actually moves in with his bride does the Torah recognize the marriage. And the chuppah is just symbolic of that. The yichud room is even more symbolic of it. But ultimately, they have to be living together and investing in the relationship. In Talmudic times, the couple was actually given a whole year interval in between, as I described to you. The first part called Erusin, which might be loosely translated as the first phase, the engagement, okay? And then there was the second phase. And during that period, during the first phase, it was a preparation. And hopefully a preparation for marriage, not just for a wedding. So many people spend so much time. Think about how much time a bride spends on her gown and how much on the flowers, that they have to be just such, and every other detail of the decor and the bridesmaids and the, what do you call the retinue's clothing. And there must be a name for the haberdashery, for the garment. What do they call it? Come on. I can't believe I'm getting loose. I'm losing the terminology here of what everybody puts into to make sure that it's just right. Right? The point our sages made was, don't just invest in the wedding, but in the marriage. And therefore, the halachic marriage process was one that first the groom would give the bride a ring. And the bride would then move actually not into his home with him, but rather she would move into back into her parents' house. And he would live with his parents or in his own place. And they would prepare for the wedding and for their marriage together. And that took a year. It was a process. They could not be intimately together until after the second process. Today, like I said yesterday, when a couple go to the Beis Din to apply for the marriage, if they're living together, she is not considered a virgin. Today, we live in a very different world. It's a different society that we live in than back then. And something unique about our community is that grooms and brides must prepare for their weddings. Back in the day, it was a full year process. Today, the Beis Din does not dictate how long it will be. But one thing I could tell you is that the groom and bride have to go through a training process, a halachic lessons. My wife teaches the brides. I spend time with some grooms, time permitting. They have to go through chassan and kala classes, usually like 5 or 6 sessions, to learn the laws of nida, of what it means, how to observe the laws from a halachic perspective. When a woman's menstruating, the laws of mikvah, how to calculate the time, how to know, and when you have questions, how to ask, and what, etc. Right? So the whole class that's based that preparation, and then that's not enough. Our Beis Din requires that every bride and groom go for another compatibility class. This is not halachic. This is not religious. This is actually facilitated through the Chevra Kadisha. And I believe they have to pay for those classes. They don't have to pay us for some reason for our classes. I don't understand why our time is less precious, but whatever the case is, they have to pay for classes that are facilitated by the Chev. And these are classes to make sure that husband and wife will be very well prepared to understand the compatibility psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, financially, what it takes to live together. Because many couples today, unfortunately, far too many end up in divorce. And to mitigate, to minimize, to try to control that, there is an entire training process, classes that are done. Back in the day, there was a year. During that year, they prepared. Today, halachically speaking, at least, we incorporate both the first and second phase into the chuppah ceremony. The first is when the groom gives the bride a ring. And the second phase is when the bride and groom stand under the chuppah together and then enter the yichud room in seclusion, which is why, as I said before, we read the ketubah, so to say, as a break. And the rabbi gives us little words of blessing and encouragement to the bride and groom during that time. So that's the separation. Let's look at it in Maimonides, Rambam. He gives us a little bit of information about why the sages required this and how the mandate to actually moving in together is what completes the marriage process. Let's read the words. According to rabbinic law, a consecrated woman is forbidden to engage in sexual relations with her husband as long as she lives in her father's home. As long as she is not married to him, they are not allowed to be sexually together. A woman who has relations with a man who has relations with his arusa. Arusa literally means his fiance, his engaged spouse, in his father-in-law's home, is punished with rabbinically sanctioned lashes. Yeah, we've had separate classes where we talked about lashes, known as malchus. Even when the husband consecrated his wife by having sexual relations with her, he is forbidden to engage in sexual relations with her again until he brings her into his home. So if a man says, but I sinned already once, so I already broke it. We did what we did. Can't I do it again? No, you can't do it again. Okay? One wrong doesn't mean you can do a second one. Only once you're actually married can you do it again. The setting aside is referred to as entry into the chuppah and is universally referred to as marriage. Once a consecrated woman has entered the chuppah, her husband is allowed to have relations with her at any time he desires, and she is considered to be his wife with regard to all matters. Now, of course, that's a misnomer because they can't just have relations anytime he desires. It has to be consensual. It has to be they both desire, and there are certain times that they have it not. But of course, I just selected a part of Rambam. If you continue, obviously you know that the halacha is when she's nida, she's menstruating, it's not allowed, etc. But the point we discussed is the history of marriage as it appears in the Torah. And though common practice since the beginning of time, it was at Mount Sinai when God gave us the Torah that the laws were formalized and the practice is introduced into formal procedure as it's done. And even since then, how it's evolved and how the law is, how the sages added the second phase of the process, requiring the groom not only to perform an act, but to display his seriousness, or I should say today, their seriousness, to actually live together and be husband and wife. So of course, let's return now back to our original subject, to understand the Torah's unique take on relationships and how it solves the boredom issue. How we could all be like Eli and have 64 years of commitment. How long are the Goldsteins together? 59 years, Canaan Hara. 10 year boot to many more happy, healthy, good years. Please God. So my friends, what makes a mitzvah called a pa'ula nimshachas? What makes it lasting? How could you be like the Goldsteins and have 59 years? 59 years since you met or 59 years of marriage? How many years do you know each other? 65 years. Ooh la la. Canaan her. Beautiful. That's beautiful. Keep going strong. What a role model. What a role model to today's young couples. Please God. Yeah. Pa'ula nimshachas means an ongoing act. And we're going to talk about that now. The period leading up to the Second World War was one of the great, innovative and sophisticated times of Talmudic and halachic development and study. It's a very important time in Jewish law to bear in mind. And think about the magnitude of what the Holocaust did to us, of how many great sages it snuffed away, it murdered. It's unbelievable. To think where Judaism would have been today without a Holocaust. I mean, it's unimaginable. Nothing good has come out of the Holocaust. Well, you might say, thank God we have the land of Israel today. Yes, things are different. Times are different. And unfortunately, the Holocaust really took away a lot more than just 6 million of our people, but also the institutions of Judaism that were thriving in Europe, and the potential within each of those people to think how many Jews in the world there would be today, if not for a Holocaust, if not for the pogroms, and if not for the expulsions and the Crusades and all the other terrible events that happened throughout our history. But I want to talk about in the great yeshivas of the time, just preceding the Holocaust, it was popular to attempt to systemize the Talmudic and halachic authorities into a cohesive legal system, as opposed to traditional straightforward study of Talmudic texts. Many of the great sages who lived in that time, they formulated methods of study. And one of the period's greatest Talmudic scholars was a great sage by the name of Rabbi Yosef Rosen. He was the Rav in a town called Dvinsk, which is in Latvia. And he was popularly known as the Rogachev Gaon, the genius of Rogachev. Rogachev was the city where he was born. So even though he was the Rav in Dvinsk, which is Latvia, but he was born in Rogachev, which is in Belarus. So he was known as the Rogachev Gaon. Could you tell me of another great Gaon of that time? A little bit earlier? The Vilna Gaon. Right. The Vilna Gaon was the genius of Vilna in Lithuania. He unfortunately also was known as the great opponent, the great Misnagid, the opponent of the Hasidic movement. He was a great genius, a great scholar, and he's even quoted by many of the Hasidic masters, by the Rebbe very much. He was a great genius, and he feared the Hasidic movement. Maybe we'll talk about that in 2 weeks' time when it's Chai Elul, which is the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. We could talk about then that. We could talk a little bit more about that then. But today I'm going to talk about the Rogachever. In fact, the Rogachever was the rabbi who gave smicha, rabbinic ordination. What is that? Right here, right now? Shoot. Maybe that's why my wife's phone. Let's check. So the Rogachever, his specialty was applying abstract theory that often he took from Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. It touches on philosophical and metaphysical concepts and applying it to halacha, to practical Jewish law. And in getting to the bottom of the Talmud's and halachic authorities' thought system, he detected theoretical patterns that ran through apparently unconnected topics. So he was a real genius, and he synthesized and synchronized different ideas. And once the Rogachever, he traveled to Brisk. Where was Brisk? In Lithuania. The Brisk Rav, exactly. Who was the great Rav in Brisk? The Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. He was known as Rabbi Chaim, the Rav. In fact, his son or grandson was Rabbi Sheber Soloveitchik, and I studied in his yeshiva, known as Yeshiva University, which is in New York. Okay? I studied at Yeshiva University, correct. So now, pardon? He just got a smicha, the dean. Chaim gave smicha to the dean of Yeshiva University. How interesting is that? Wow. Look, I don't know if any of the previous deans had smicha. I don't know if the dean, I don't even remember who the dean was in my time. Actually, I do remember. Was it not Norman Lamb? No. I think it was Norman Lamb. But he had smicha. He was a doctor and a rabbi. He was a great genius, but he's since passed away. So you say the current dean. I don't know who the current dean is, but you say he just got smicha. Okay? From Raza's son. How do you like that? So Raza's son, Rabbi Chaim Finkelstein, who heads the yeshiva in Pretoria of ordaining local rabbis and rabbis from around the world. It's a big deal that he gave smicha to the dean. I'll tell you what is most fascinating about that is that Yeshiva University has its own smicha program. In fact, it's a very, very intense smicha program. It takes 4 years to get smicha there. So interesting that he went to get smicha from your son and not from his own yeshiva. That's fascinating. That's very interesting. I must understand why that is. But anyways, that will be for another time. Now, the Brisker Rav had his own style. In fact, the Yeshiva University style of study is framed on the Brisker Rav's style of teaching. Okay? Rabbi Chaim chose in his writing and his teachings to attempt to define the Talmud's legal terms and concepts. He was a great genius himself, and he headed a tremendous yeshiva in Lithuania at the time. And Reb Chaim, in fact, is probably the one who gets much of the credit for the Litvish, or the Lithuanian study method that is today the standard in Israeli and diaspora yeshivas. So we're talking about the turn of the past century, the early 1900s. And these great pre-war figures, they're the ones who popularized the unique approach. You think about some of the great other rabbis at the time who are known, Rabbi Baruch Bar Leibovitz, Reb Shimon Shkop, Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik. These, and that was the Rab's son, right? These were his students at the yeshiva in Brisk. And these are many of the great Talmudic personalities of the pre-war era. And although there's similarities, but their theories and the theory of Rav Chaim Brisker, it was more legalistic and grounded as opposed to the Rogachover, who often touched on more philosophical and metaphysical ideas. Personally, I'm not one of those who understands all that philosophy and metaphysical, mystical Kabbalah. But if you study their ideas, you could sometimes see great, great genius. It's very, very deep. And I usually get lost even attempting to figure out what they're saying. So the Rogachover once traveled to Brisk to meet Reb Chaim Brisker, Rabbi Soloveitchik. You see how in those days people were called by the city they came from. For example, my great-grandfather, although he was born in Vitebsk, well, actually, I don't know if he was born in Vitebsk, but he was known as Reb David Haraducker. Why was he called Haraducker? His surname was Kievman. Probably Kievman because maybe his great-grandfather came from the city of Kiev. Now, who would know about Kiev if not for the whole war going on in Ukraine now, right? But Kiev is the capital of Ukraine. So we have some ancestry from Kiev. But my great-grandfather wasn't called, although his surname was Kievman, he was called Reb David Haraducker because he was a rabbi in a town called Haraduk. Okay, somewhere in the former Soviet Union. So each of these rabbis were given a name either from the town they came from or the town they were a rabbi in. The Rogachover came from that city Rogachov in Belarus, but he was a rabbi in Dvinsk in Latvia. And Reb Chaim Brisker, I don't know where he was born, but he was the rabbi in Brisk. Okay, so one day Rabbi Yosef Rosen, the Rogachover Gaon, is visiting Brisk, went to Lithuania. Okay, the European Union, it's easy if you have a European passport to travel within the European countries. I don't know what it was like back then, a century ago, but I guess it was easier than going from jumping over from Joburg to there. When he came into Reb Chaim's study, he right away greeted him. He exclaimed, Mazel Tov! What's Mazel Tov? Usually you meet somebody, what do you say? Shalom Aleichem. And you know how us Jews do. You want to show that you disagree with somebody. So you say the opposite. What do you say? No, Aleichem Shalom. Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom. But you greet somebody with Shalom, hello, peace unto you. When do you say Mazel Tov? It's a special occasion. But that day was no special occasion. It wasn't the Rogachover's birthday. It wasn't his anniversary. It wasn't, he certainly didn't get a new car or a fancy suit, okay? His most distinguished feature, I should have put it in the pictures. Maybe I'll do it for tomorrow since we didn't finish what we wanted to get through today. If you look at the Rogachover Gaon, he didn't look like a typical rabbi. You ever seen a picture of him? He had very long hair. He had wild hair. You know who he looked similar to? Einstein. Him and Einstein look very similar. They were both geniuses. He actually, I think the difference there was Einstein maybe didn't have the time to take a haircut or didn't have I don't know. There is a concept, by the way, the hair is so deeply connected to the brain. Now, brainless people like me don't feel it. But if you're the Rogachover, if you're Einstein, maybe they do feel it and they couldn't have a haircut. The Rogachover, I believe, was also a Nazarite. Not very common. He did not say he didn't have haircuts, which means he also didn't drink wine. Now, any words between these two great rabbis, I don't think was just a matter of hopelessness. You don't just say, Reb Chaim Brisker wouldn't say Mazel Tov to the Rogachover Gaon for no reason, right? So his congratulations, his greetings to him obviously needed some kind of explanation. And as you would expect, to explain his opening remarks when he greeted him with his Mazel Tov, Reb Chaim right away went to quote Rambam's laws of blessings. And he followed it by a contradicting quote from the laws of marriage. Okay, and then he referenced the Ragat Shavar Gaon's reconciliation of these two contradicting ideas in Maimonides' Rambam's teachings. You see how great minds work. So this is all kind of brilliant talk of each other. No wonder I reflect. Well, I'll give you another, I'll say by the way, because every time I tell a story, I have to tell another story in the story. When the Rebbe was sitting Shiva, I don't know if the Rebbe was sitting Shiva, someone else was sitting Shiva. I think it was the Rebbe was sitting Shiva in 1964 or 60, Tafshin Chav Vav, in 1965, for his mother, Rebbe Chana, passed away on the 6th of Tishrei. What's that? Tafshin Chav Hey. Oh, so it's 1964. Excuse me. 1964. So I heard a story that back then, two great rabbis who came to pay a shiva call, to pay their respects to the Rebbe, was the Satmarav, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who were both great geniuses of the post-war era. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, being the great personality he was, probably played a major role in saving Orthodox Jewry in his way, of being a halachic authority. And but he was known for his leniences. He gave a lot of lenient rulings, purely because he felt there was ways of preserving orthodoxy. He felt that reform and conservative movements were becoming very predominantly strong, and he felt these were ways of doing so. For example, he allowed, not ideally, but he allowed a shorter mechitza. He felt that at least we should have a mechitza in shul. He allowed a mechitza that's so short. I once walked into a shul in Atlantic Beach, New York. When I came into the shul, it was Rosh Hashanah, 2004. I was a chazan in another shul up the road. And then afterwards, I wanted to hear a real chazan. This shul is a big, magnificent shul. It's still there. They have a great rabbi today, Rabbi Eli Weinstock, who was the rabbi formerly at KJ, Haladat Yeshurun Synagogue in Manhattan. Of the famous congregants of that shul includes the Trump family. President Trump's daughter, Ivanka, who converted Orthodox, and she married Jared Kushner. They belonged to the shul where he was formerly the rabbi. Now he's the rabbi at this Atlantic Beach shul. Back then, it was a different rabbi. Weiss has a phenomenal voice. At my chuppah, I asked him to sing the Baruch Haba under our chuppah. He has such a powerful voice, and there was just such a strong song that I sort of burst into like joy and laughter of him singing under my chuppah. I could show you the video of it sometime. Anyways, what was I getting to? I wanted to hear Cantor Weiss. He had this powerful voice, and there was a choir singing with him. When I walked into the shul, I thought I walked into a Reformed temple, which wasn't exactly where I intended to be. So I walked right out, and somebody came chasing out. Come back, come back. And I said, yeah, but I'm looking for the Orthodox shul. Not for. He goes, of course we're Orthodox. I said, am I the men and women sitting together? Because in this shul, if you walked inside, you would think the men and women were sitting together. Because they use what they call the Moshe Mechitza. It's the lowest the Mechitza could be, which was probably shoulder height or even less. And when you're sitting, it's probably less than shoulder height. So the way they designed the shul is the ladies were sitting a little bit above the men. And basically the benches meet up with each other. So husbands and wives could technically be sitting right next to each other. And they call this a Ramosha Mechitza. I don't know. But that's what Ramosha ruled, that you could have that. And he also said that chalav, that people could drink milk that's not chalav Yisrael, because he felt that in America, at least, where there's FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, the Food and Drug Administration, that ensures that if you violate their rules, it's serious trouble for a company. So he figured that most companies will not fool around. If they tell you it's cow's milk, and there won't be any pig's milk in there, and that he said you can rely on that to be kosher. Of course, in South Africa as well. But of course, Hasidim are careful to have only Chalav Yisrael, which means a Mashgiach is supervising to know for certain that it's kosher milk. Because if you remember, there was a case right here in South Africa a couple of years ago where a company, not Jewish company, but a company was selling meat, which was supposed to be beef, and it turns out it was horse meat. Remember that? And that's why many people don't rely on these types of leniencies. that Rabbi Feinstein felt was allowed, especially for people who really needed the calcium and the lactose, etc. Anyways, the Satmarov, who was a Hasidic Rebbe, did not approve of these types of leniencies. So he extended his hand over a table that was coming into the shiva of the Rebbe's mother. And Rav Moshe Feinstein's response was, in halacha, it says you're not allowed to greet one another in the house of a mourner. So how could you extend your hand to me just outside? Well, Rabbi Heidelbaum was a very sharp man. And his response was, well, according to you, this table is enough of a mechitza between the mourners and us. Okay, you understand the way brilliant minds work. So the truth is we're running over time, but I want to conclude with giving you this idea from the Rogatchover Gaon. So please spare me a couple of more minutes to share this idea with you, and then we'll enjoy lunch. So the Rogatchover and the Reb Chaim Brisker were having this little interesting, amusing little conversation. Chaim Brisker said Mazel Tov to the Rogatchover Gaon, even though he didn't buy a new car and he didn't even have a haircut and he didn't have any simcha or celebration in his family. So what was this about? He went on to pontificate, to lecture. By the sermon's end, it became clear to anyone present that in fact, the Rogatchover Gaon, by his own uniquely branded abstract reasoning, deserved a hearty mazel tov. Why? It was the happiest day of his life. You see, this distinguished elder man, with the wild long hair as the Rogatchover was always seen, and his striking curly long white beard, you got to see a picture of what he looked like. His forehead creased from decades of intense study. You look at the wrinkles. He was, in fact, a newlywed, even though he was married for many years, as if he was walking down the aisle to the chuppah. Who would not wish mazel tov to a man of such extraordinary? Yeah. So here is the idea as it is explained by, as he explained it. Okay, here's what Rambam says. In the laws of blessing, Hilchot Brachos, the Rambam discusses someone who forgot to recite a bracha when performing a mitzvah. Now, generally speaking, if you do a mitzvah and you forget to recite a bracha, then the opportunity is lost. If you miss the opportunity, you can't suddenly remember at your son's wedding that you forgot to make a bracha at his bris. It's too late. The time's already elapsed. But what if you remember halfway through today's shiur? Oh, it's almost lunch now. You forgot to make a bracha thanking God for the unique opportunity to come learn Torah this morning. What's the bracha you need to say to study Torah? Not Torah. Just because just because our class is almost done today, doesn't mean that for the last few minutes that we're studying some Torah, that you can't say the blessing and give the sincere appreciation to God's Torah, right? And Rambam draws a distinction between mitzvahs that entail a quick one-time act and mitzvahs that endure over a period of time. So if you forgot to say a bracha on a mitzvah that's quick, it's a one-time act. You just having a cookie. Right? You forgot to say the bracha and you missed the opportunity. The mitzvah's done. There's nothing left for which to recite the bracha. You already finished that cookie. You chowed it down. But what if you forgot to say a bracha on a mitzvah that stretches over a period of time? As long as you're still in the middle of doing that mitzvah, you could still bless the part unfulfilled. So if you didn't say the bracha this morning for your Torah study, or for wearing tzitzis, or for anything else that needs a blessing that's ongoing, then you can still say the blessing. So now if I were to ask you, if you were to remember right now that on your wedding day, from great excitement, you forgot to say the bracha. Well, the bracha under the chuppah. The truth is you don't say it. You only answer amen for the rabbi saying it. Okay? But are you allowed to say it now if you forgot to do it then? It's too long after. 65 years. And you say the bracha 65 years later. Yeah? Oh, you see the genius mind at work. Now, simple logic would say the first thing you forgot to say it then. It's too late now, right? You should have said it then. If the shochet's shechting, he can't say the bracha after he shechted. It's done. What's done is done. What was. right? 72 minutes. 59 years ago, they got married. 72 minutes. 72 minutes is for benching. Okay. But if you're continuing the meal and you started your meal without saying a bracha, now you're going to eat something else. Say the bracha before you eat the next piece. But you would think if marriage is a one-time thing, you got married 59 years ago, done and dusted. You might be paying the consequences of it or enjoying the benefits of it, right? Depending on your relationship. Yours, I see it's Purim and Simchas Torah, unlike the couple we talked about yesterday, or Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, their whole wedding, the whole marriage. But if you're celebrating it, the wedding was 59 years ago. What's there to say today? But just like Miriam told us, and you see it here, Rambam says, Rambam actually rules that once the wedding is passed, you don't go back. Now you would think that it's done. But the Rogatchover had a different point. Text 7. He said, no, it's not done. Yes, you placed the finger on her ring, right? It's hers to keep. You're married. Now comes the wedding ring. Oh, no, we did the wedding. Engagement ring, wedding ring. Now comes the suffering. No, just kidding. I'm joking. Now comes the bliss, the honeymoon. You know why I wish couples, they should have an eternal honeymoon? Because I've seen too many come back from honeymoon, and now the divorce proceedings begin. So just be on honeymoon forever, and you won't have to worry. You'll be too busy enjoying each other. No divorce proceedings, right? But the Rogatchover tells us here something interesting. He says, no, marriage is what's called a pe'ula nimsheches. It's a continuous action, okay? It's a continuous action. It's something that keeps going on. Chassidus tells us God's creation of this world is a pe'ula nimsheches, that God continues to create this world at every single moment. Unlike a craftsman who built this computer, who built this table, the contractors who built this building, until we have to do a renovation, please God. What's done is done. Almighty God continues to animate, to vivify, to create, to keep this world going at every single moment. What's the most godly act a human can do, can perform? The act of marriage. Two opposite beings coming together. The act of creation that the potential of a husband and wife possess. Most godly. And therefore, it is the act of marriage, according to the Rogatchover, that is a pe'ula nimsheches. It is a continuous action as long as the mitzvah result still exists. As long as you're still married to each other, you're still performing that mitzvah the Rogatchover felt. So the same thing you might say applies to the bris, by the way. Okay, as long as you actually have that bris, the act of the bris was once, right? 8 days old. You had that party at HOD or wherever. That used to be the favorite bris spot. As long as you're still circumcised, the Rogatchover says you still have the opportunity to continue. That bris is always with you. You know, did I tell you the joke about the guy who arrived in South Africa many years ago? 1600s. He came with, who came here? Van der Riebeeck. What year did Van Riebeeck come? He came on the boat, but what year did he come on the boat? 1652. So when Van Riebeeck came here, there was a Yid from Lithuania who arrived with him. And this Yid from Lithuania on the way, where did Van Riebeeck come from? Sorry, from Holland. He was a Dutch Jew. You know, in 1492, Columbus, there was debate if he was a Jew, because he set sail right after Tisha B'Av 1492. What happened in Tisha B'Av 1492? The expulsion of Jews from Spain, the whole of, you know, and Portugal. So this Jew comes. I was just kicked out of Zoom, so I think that might be an indication that the shir's to end. You see, I'm kicked out of Zoom. I don't know why, but the story goes that this Jew left. This Jew comes to South Africa. You know, on the boat, Van Riebeeck and his people thought it was quite funny. Why do you have these funny side curls? So they gave him a haircut, took off his beard, and they gave him a nice goatee. Had to look Dutch, not Jewish. He had to fill in. So what are these straps for? What is this, a blood pressure kit? What is it? You don't need that. And before he knows it, he's living here and he's setting up his life. And now he has enough money to bring his Yiddish mama to come visit him. Now his mother comes from, where did we say? From Holland, from Amsterdam, right? She comes on the ship. She arrives in Cape Town, and her son comes to greet her. She looks at him. She says, "Mein Boychik, mein Jingle, was geschehen? Where's your beard? Where's your payas? Where's your yarmulke? Where's your tzitzis? Oi." And then she asked to her sister, fill in the excuses for everything. This is South Africa. It's a new country. It's not Europe. Da, da, da. Comes to the house. Where's the mezuzah? He says, "No, mama, this is South Africa. It's different." And then she comes into the house. She wants to eat something. She opens the fridge. I know, on Rubik's times, there weren't fridges, but whatever fridge they had in those days. And she sees food that wasn't so kosher. And the Dutch, what they like. Ay. She looks at her son. She says, "Mein Yankel, are you still circumcised? Tell me, please." All right, ladies and gents, I think we'll have to conclude with the words of the Vilna Gaon, not the Vilna Gaon, the Rogatchover Gaon. Tomorrow, I hope to get through this idea. We'll do part 3 of Jewish marriage relationships, how they endure, because I'm sure you're all wondering, if men are from Mars and women are from Venus, then what does it mean that men are from Nautzar and women are from Nake? We'll get back to that. Yes, Miriam. Yeah, I like that. No. Yeah, since the Gemara says that actually marriages, it's quite difficult to make a marriage, just like splitting the sea. The nature of the sea, think about it this way. The nature of water is not to be split, right? It's not to have dry land in between. So the nature of human beings is that naturally we're narcissistic, we're self-centered. Men are men, women are women. Naturally, it's different. It's not the natural thing for us necessarily. Now, it is. We established right at the beginning of creation, it's natural for men and women to come together in the right way. But naturally speaking, we have our own priorities. Why should I share my bedroom with somebody else who's different than me? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. So it's not so easy putting people together. To be continued, please God. Zaikas everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Enjoy lunch and see you tomorrow. See you tomorrow, please.